This gentleman's name is Andy Paul. Some of you might have met him last night at the welcome reception at the WeWork facility here in downtown Durham. Andy Paul is an entrepreneur, best-selling author, sales guru, the founder of the Sales House, and what I would consider a good friend. I met Andy a little over a year ago. He runs a very successful podcast called Accelerate, and I said, you know, I'd love to be a guest on Accelerate. So I shot him an email, and he shot me back an email really fast, and said, I'd love to have you on a guest. I was really excited, but then I found out that I wouldn't be a guest for about 3 months. Shows how popular his podcast is and the kind of desire of people wanting to be on there. So eventually got to join Andy on his podcast. He joined mine, and we developed a relationship from there. And one of the things Andy's going to talk about, and I'm very interested to hear, is, you know, what's going on with B2B sales today, and what's the problems, and can it be fixed? And I can't think of a better person to speak about this topic than Andy Paul. So please help me welcome Andy Paul to the T-Rex stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Eric. Hey, I have something to do first. My son's my business partner, and he's a millennial, and nothing really happens unless you document it. So I have to take a picture here just to make sure he knows that I was actually here doing this today. So if everybody can smile, at least that group over there. Thank you. Thank you. Vince, Eric, thank you for inviting me. This is a wonderful facility. Thank you all for spending the time with us today. Yeah, we had a little bit of a problem with the clicker this morning. I don't know if anybody knew the clicker really wasn't working. And it sort of brought to mind this story about how you need to be prepared for any eventuality in sales. And it got me thinking about a story earlier in my career where I'd just been promoted to run international sales for a company. And I was making my first international business trip to Sweden to close about a $2 million deal. And we flew in overnight and got to the airport about 9 o'clock in the morning, went to our hotel, slept for a couple hours, got dressed in my best suit, and was walking over to meet the client. And as I start walking into their building, for the first international business meeting I'd ever done, as I start walking into the building, I feel boom, boom, boom. It's like every pigeon in Stockholm had decided that I was the target. So here I was going to my first important international business meeting, client I'd never met, covered with pigeon poop. It was really interesting. So we did close the deal, though, which was good. So we're going to talk today about, can B2B sales be fixed? And actually, I think the topic is really different. The question is really, can B2B sales be saved? Now, this is not some horror story about how AI is going to come in and take all of our jobs, and replace us. I really can hardly look at LinkedIn these days because it seems like every day there's another article about AI this, AI that, and so on. And we've had analysts like Forrester, if you don't remember the 2015 report they put out that said by 2020, a good chunk of B2B sales is going to be gone, which really hasn't been the case. Actually, employment and sales is up over that time. But that doesn't mean the threat still doesn't exist. And so the existential threat that exists to sales is us, the sellers, sales leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and the way that we deal with our customers. There's multiple studies been done about C-level CEOs, C-level executives, people in decision makers, people responsible for purchasing. And what they reflect is that, I'm telling you on the study, is anywhere from 60 to 80% of people making decisions in B2B sales say there's no value that they derive from their interactions with salespeople. And so that's kind of a problematic issue, right? I mean, if we can't add value, well, that's a problem. So I imagine that most of you are probably familiar with Neil Rackham. So Neil written a number of books about sales, including spin selling, which if you haven't read spin selling, you should put it in your library, you should read it. But about 20 years ago, he published a book called Rethinking the Sales Force, which to me was a fascinating book. But what he said in there was that if a sales channel doesn't add value to a buyer, then the buyer will buy from the channel that adds the least cost. Meaning that if a channel doesn't add value, the customer will buy on the basis of price. So you think about what we're just saying is that, okay, 80% of our customers are saying there's no value from the interaction with salespeople, and if there's no value, then they're going to buy on the basis of price. So that's kind of an issue for us, right? When we talk about the sustainability of our profession, being able to add value is really the core of it. Now, the world's changed dramatically. When I started selling, back when the covered wagons were still crossing the plains, is the buyer didn't have access to information. They had me, right? They could basically only buy as fast as I was able to sell to them. Now, obviously, that's changed dramatically in the last 40 years. Now, though, they can gather so much information that what they need from us is a much smaller subset than it was before, right? Because they have access to all this information online, user review sites, so on and so forth. And so when it boils down, what do they really need from us? They need, the questions, right? They need our insights. They need the challenge that we can offer to them in terms of rethinking their problem or rethinking the solution they think they need for the problem that they're trying to solve or the outcome they're trying to achieve. And there's probably no better way to sort of illustrate that. I don't know if you can really see this. This was put out by Gartner. Last year, Gartner unveiled their research on buyer enablement, and they've interviewed thousands of firms about this, and this is the buying journey. Now, think about it. I imagine most of you, probably somewhere, have defined your sales process. And your sales process is some linear, stage-based process. We've got stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, so on. Each one we finally defined exit criteria for each. What's that have to do with this? Absolutely nothing. Right? So this is the process our buyers go through. I'll see if the little thing works. Now see if you can find the word sales rep on here. Anybody? It's in the lower right-hand corner, and it shows up one time. This is the buyer's perception of the value they get from sellers. And I don't think that's very encouraging as a salesperson myself, because it seems like we need to be able to add more value throughout their process than what they're getting. Now, our tendency is to say, well, look, we can use technology to make it easier, to make it better, to be more effective, right? And so when I was looking at this slide, I was thinking back over the technology and how it's evolved over my career. So I've been in sales 42 years. I know, I don't look it, thank you. And I was thinking back when I was a senior in high school. I was living in Tokyo, Japan. My father was there in business. And this was 1973, is when the home office wanted to contact him. They first sent him a telex. You probably don't remember a telex. It was like almost like a telegram you could send somebody. 300 bit per second, state-of-the-art communication then. And then he would get dressed and go to the office to receive the fax because it was such a big deal. Getting a fax was a big deal. He would get dressed and go to the office in the middle of the night. And then I think when I started my career a few years later, the big innovation for sellers was overnight delivery. Overnight delivery, that's a big thing because, back then if we wanted to produce a proposal, we had to write it out by hand, we'd give it to an administrative person who would type it. We'd go through about 26 revisions with correct tape and white out and so on, and then we'd stick it in an envelope and send it to someone because you couldn't fax the proposal to someone. So FedEx, this was great, and there's a real cachet with the buyer got this proposal via FedEx. And that was transformative for selling in many ways. And then a few years later, I was working for a smallish growing company. Many of you might have heard of. It's called Apple. And they had started this PC revolution. So as sellers, suddenly we didn't rely on administrative staff to help us create our proposals. We could sit down with I forget what the basic word processing program was then, and with VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet program, create our proposals. Wow, life transformed. A couple years later, running a part of sales for a company was making the first battery-powered notebook computer. Beautiful little thing. And we, in 1980, mid-80s, in 80s dollars, we sold $150 million worth of these things. Every company had a big distributed sales force because they wanted to have that experience already of, wow, we can put this in front of our clients, how fantastic. Now, of course, it didn't work. You know, still about 3 years before anybody could make that technology work. But we sold the hell out of it. But then soon thereafter, Compaq, for many people know Compaq, came out with the first portable computers, a 36-pound thing that was like a rollaboard suitcase. And I really ruined my back traveling across country. All my clients were in New York. I was in California. All my clients were in New York. And Washington, D.C., I was going out 2 or 3 times a month, putting this thing in the overhead bin. Had a 6-inch CRT. So we could sit with prospects and we could show our documents and our proposals. It was revolutionary. And then right about the same time, this next big innovation happened that really transformed sales. It's called voicemail. See, this is all part of my career. Voicemail. Yeah, before, sellers today think we got so hard because, people never answer their phone. Back then, we'd call a receptionist who would put you through an extension, and without voicemail, no one ever answered it. So you start continue down the path as, then we started getting Ethernet. Now we could start collaborating with our peers in the office. We had internal email. A couple years later, the internet started creeping up. AOL, Prodigy, then we got browsers, then the internet opened up, webmail. Suddenly we could send email to customers. You start to track this path, suddenly you get search engines, broadband, all these things in my career. Broadband, Google, YouTube, smartphones, the cloud, and yet we had all this in the last few years, this incredible rush of technology for sales tools and marketing tools, and yet there's not one report that's been done that I've seen that says that if you look at the average productivity per salesperson today, adjusted for inflation, is any more productive than they were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we got all this, like I said, froth and wealth of technology, and it's not fundamentally making a difference. So really the question is, we talk about, why is that? Why is that the case that the impacts of technology aren't happening the way that we thought they would? And why aren't we able to help our customers better than we have been before? Because in addition to the customer not finding value from us, we're also, if you look at the industry reports, CSO Insights reports, does a big broad survey every year of B2B sellers and sales organizations, is that for the last 7 years, the percentage of sales reps hitting quota is dropping year after year after year to now, for the last 7 years, now fewer than 50% of sales reps make quota. Other analysts reporting that at the same time this is happening, that anywhere from 60 to 80% of the qualified opportunities in your pipeline, on average, end up in a no decision. And Forrester and other analysts reporting over the same time frame that B2B win rates are dropping. So clearly something's going on, right? Something is happening at this time when we should be prospering, and some companies still are, obviously, but at a time as a profession we should be prospering, we seem to be struggling. And so the question, the existential threat, is not that we, let's say, get replaced by robots. It's that through our inaction, we just sort of gradually slide into irrelevance in the whole equation. Now, this isn't just a matter of our knowledge and what we can provide to our buyers. It's also the way we manage, we measure sales, and the way we develop our people. Because fundamentally, I made this point last night, the receptionists, fundamentally, we're still today measuring sales performance the same way we did 100 years ago. We're still basically managing people somewhat the same way we did 100 years ago. Allocating our resources inappropriately, and we're not investing in developing our people. And arguably, we're developing our people less well than we did 40, 50, 60 years ago. So some of this needs to change. So I want to share with you today some perspectives about things we could do differently and need to do differently in order to make sure there's really a future for us, not just in the next 5, 10 years, but beyond that. So I want to address some metrics initially, and then I'm going to talk about some allocation of resource issues, and then we'll talk about developing people. Now, before we get started on that, I've coined this term, confident incompetence. And I think this is sort of infecting sales these days. And it's not just obviously sales, but I know about sales. Has anybody heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Right, so what the Dunning-Kruger effect says is that people generally overestimate their capabilities, their knowledge, and their skills, and lack the emotional intelligence to acknowledge that and take steps to fix it. And so where I see this in sales all the time is, hey, I get a little success, I know what I'm doing. Or, hey, we've been doing this for 20 years, this works, right? Let's just keep on doing more of it. And this is a mindset we have to combat. We have to understand that when we take that mindset, we are becoming confidently incompetent. Because if we stop learning, we stop improving, we stop having an open mind to ways we could do things better, to achieve better outcomes for our customers, better outcomes for ourselves, then we'd start becoming incompetent. So let me start with the metric that I think absolutely needs to change. And that is, we need to get rid of quota. Now, there's a British economist, he's passed away since, but his name, Goodhart, Charles Goodhart. I think I'll make sure I get that right. And he came up with a formulation. I'm going to read it for you so you get it. And Goodhart law, whoops, well, never mind. I was going to read it to you. It's a long expression. But so Goodhart's law, and economists have studied this, and they validate it. And basically what Goodhart's law says is that when a measure becomes a target, it loses all value as a measure. And what data scientists studying this have found is that what happens is people optimize their processes to achieve the target. And when you do that, it doesn't have any value. So you think about this. We've got something we've been doing for 100 years plus, probably 130 years at this point, 140 years, that we've been selling in a modern way in America. And we're using a measure of performance that basically doesn't measure anything anymore because so few people attain it. So what's the purpose, right? How does it help us make our sellers more efficient and more effective? How does it help us help them help their buyers? It doesn't. And you think about how quotas are set. You know, every year it's sort of top-down exercise. You know, CEO, CRO, VP of sales sit in a room. They say, yeah, we want to go 10% this year, so let's raise quotas 10%. Across the board. Maybe I'll make it 15 because, you know, half the people won't make it, so if we do 15, that'll be fantastic. Yet no one ever stops and says, let's assess our people. Have we invested in them to improve their skill sets by 15% over this past year? Have we measured that? Of course not. We're just going to raise quotas. And so we get this vicious cycle going on. We keep raising quotas, fewer and fewer people make it, and where's the value? So there's an alternative to that. An alternative is to start looking at time, right? The most precious resource we have as sellers is time. Yet we never measure time and the effectiveness of the time that we use. And it seems like in sales we think we're immune to this whole idea of productivity. Because productivity in sales is a sales manager saying, well, last year my guys were setting up 5 conversations today. Today doing 6. They're therefore more productive. And they're not. They've done more activity. Quota is an activity metric. It's not a productivity metric. So productivity, as defined by economists and used around the world in production companies and so on, it's a rate of output generated by a unit of input. So if we really want to understand how we're performing in sales, we say, how many dollars of revenue are we generating per hour of selling time? That gives me some information. How many dollars of revenue am I generating per hour of selling time? Because you think about it, if you're a sales manager, you're trying to define what your productive capacity was, your total sales capacity was. What most managers do today is say, well, I've got 10 people and they've got $1 million quota. Our theoretical capacity is $1 million. But if you know what somebody's productivity is, you can make an assumption about the number of selling hours they have, multiply times the number of people, then you've got a number that accurately reflects what your total potential is. Now, I had the fortune of managing teams using this methodology, growing teams from 0 to $100 million. And it's so valuable because I knew exactly how much time people were spending to make certain deals happen. I could have 2 people that both closed $1 million deal. One maybe spent 20 hours, one spent 25 hours. What was the difference? It gave me something I could work with them on. to help them understand how to do a better job. I could correlate to win rates and losses. And ironically, in some cases, we had people that were spending more time on losing deals than on winning deals. Well, that's information you want to have, because then you can start taking some action and actually making a difference. Because then you can start diagnosing. With Quota, you can't really diagnose anything. So productivity then also has another benefit over quota. Quota sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If I'm set my quota at X, as the data scientist said, you optimize your processes to achieve the target. Where if what you're measuring people on is a rate of improvement of their productivity, then you don't have that fake target there, that fake cap on your ability to perform. So we want people to start thinking about how do we measure productivity as a function of time, because that's the biggest asset our sellers have, time. Now, the thing that goes along with that is another metric, which is, I'm always amused by people that focus on this so much, is length of sales cycle. Now, we showed this chart. Length of sales cycle assumes you have some control over the buyer and their process. So how much control do you have over this? None. Other than maybe just a big fat discount. Right? You virtually have no control over this. So length of sales cycle is immaterial. What you want to know is how many hours did we spend collectively as a team to bring a deal from initial point of contact to close. Your length of your sales cycle is not a duration, it's a quantity. If you really want to understand what's happening in your selling, you have to focus on this. And so, how many selling hours was involved? How many sales engineering hours? How many technical support hours? How many management hours? How many customer service support success hours were invested in bringing this deal from point of contact to close? That's your sales cycle. The duration doesn't really matter. Now, again, you can start understanding as well, gosh, I can start correlating the total hours we spend as an enterprise to close the deal to our win rates, to our loss rates. As I said before, are you investing more time in your losing deals, which is oftentimes the case because you're trying to save them. So you're investing more time on deals you probably should have disqualified and gotten out of your pipeline. Time. That is our currency as sellers. We have to measure how productive we are with that time. Another metric we need to fix is pipeline coverage ratios. Now, pipeline coverage ratios have existed as long as they've been selling. I had them when I started. But now with the advent of inside sales, it's the growth of it in such a degree, they seem to have taken on a greater sense of importance in the whole scheme of things. And there's a problem with them. Because if you are, let's say, mandated to have a 5x coverage pipeline, which is pretty common these days, especially in the SaaS world. SaaS world, not uncommon. Sellers need to have 5x pipeline coverage ratio. Let's say their deal is they need to sell 5 deals per month. So as a seller, talking about time, do you really have time as an account exec to work 25 opportunities simultaneously the way they need to be worked to win? And the answer is no. You don't have time to do the discovery the way you should be doing it, the unscripted, in-depth discovery. You don't have the time to do the needs analysis and the type of qualification you need to do. And you really don't have the incentive to do good qualification because you want to keep your pipeline coverage ratio up. So in that environment, basically you're just playing the odds. It's not really selling anymore, we're just playing the odds. If we put enough crap into our pipeline, I'm going to get a certain number of output out of that. And it has to work that way because I no longer have time to sell because I'm working so many deals. And then what happens is that your close rate, your win rate, becomes the inverse to your coverage ratio. So if you have 5x pipeline coverage, you're going to win 1 out of every 5 deals. Pretty much guaranteed. 1 out of every 5 deals. Think about that. We're in sales. And if you can only close 1 out of every 5 of your most qualified opportunities, and this is accepted. I've been to SaaS conferences, and Sangram has been to some of those same, their next speaker, where they pat themselves on the back for getting a 20% win rate. I got to tell you, folks, that sucks. That's horrible. That's not sustainable. There are some companies that are growing like bad weeds with 20% close rates. They're going to succeed in any event, right? There's always those companies. It's not the sales model. But for most of us, for the rest of the world, that doesn't work. You know, we're in the business to win. And we're in the business to serve our customers, first and foremost, but we don't do that through altruistic motives. We're there to win. Winning 1 out of 5 isn't winning. That's losing. We're teaching ourselves how to lose, right? If you're doing any activity and the outcome is you lose 80% of it, you're teaching yourself to lose. Why are we doing that? Why not think about it differently? Why not focus on increasing your win rates? When I grew sales teams, what I did is I started with my win rate. What was the win rate I wanted? And then engineered the process on top of that. As opposed to going the other way around, is let's implement this technology and see what sort of win rate it generates for us, which is what's happening today. Now, in my career, I closed about $600 million worth of orders, personally. I carried a pipeline about 1.5 the entire time. And these were $1 million plus deals oftentimes. So there was a lot of jeopardy if I didn't close them. But I had the opportunity and the time to make sure that I was selling to people that wanted to buy exactly what I was selling. You know, today, qualification represents people that want to buy something like ours. That's not qualification. But we don't have time to do anything but that. So what I'm telling you is instead of having this fixation on pipeline coverage, fixate on how do we win more business? How do we engineer a process to start with? What's the win rate we want? Is it 1 out of every 5? Or 1 out of every 2, 50%? Start there. And then say, okay, what's that mean in terms of who should fit into our ideal client profile? Where's the larger population of those people that we can reach out to? What's the best way to reach out to them? Maybe it isn't automated outreach. Maybe it is back to personal outreach. But figure out what that is. Because if we can't increase our win rates, what the customer is telling us is we're not adding value. This is how it all ties together, right? We may not have time to do a good job selling. Well, when we can't do a good job selling, the customer is saying, we're not going to buy because you don't add anything of value to me. That's what a low win rate is. It's the customer saying you're not doing a good job. 60 to 80% of opportunities falling in your pipeline is the customer saying you're not giving me a compelling reason to make a change. And then we implement processes that accentuate and amplify those bad tendencies. So if you want to increase your win rate, you've got to almost start over again. Re-engineer your process. So what can we do differently? And start with the outcome that you want to have, and then work backwards. And you've probably heard me talk about is we don't spend enough time on the middle of the funnel. You know, one of the artifacts of this great technological revolution we've had in sales the last several years with all of our sales engagement platforms and so on is that we've gone crazy on lead gen and prospecting. Because the tools, that's what they do. So let's go use them to do that. So we've got a disproportionate amount of our focus and our energy focused on the top of the funnel and then on closing, whatever that is. So I have a friend who sent me this chart. He's former senior VP of sales for one of the major technology companies. And he just started his own company about a year or so ago. And he said, you know, I've done a survey of LinkedIn and books and articles. And he says, this is the world of sales if you pay attention to social media. Is we got most of our effort and focus on prospecting and closing and almost nothing on the middle of the funnel. But the thing is, prospecting isn't selling, right? You don't win a deal in the prospecting stage. So we should have our allocation of effort look like this. We got a prospect. It's hugely important. We can't win a deal if we don't have a prospect. But our win rates are all based on making sure we spend enough time in the middle of the funnel actually doing the things that are selling. Discovery, right? Needs analysis, demonstrations, qualification, requalification, disqualification, like on and on and on. And this is our big threat, because this is where we deliver the value that the buyers need from us. When you get that small segment of the flow chart where they need sales, that's happening in the middle of the funnel. And yet we have this obsession with prospecting. Hey, I started my career going out making 40, 50 cold calls a day in person. I understand the value of a prospect. We need to put it in perspective in terms of how we need to allocate our resources. So I'll give you, is anybody a triathlete here? Anyone? Anyone done triathlon? Okay, one back there. So a triathlon, there's 3 disciplines. You swim, you bike, and you run. And I've done a handful of smaller triathlons, but I thought I'd use the Ironman triathlon, sort of the gold standard, the world championship, as the analogy. So in the world championship triathlon, the Ironman in Kona, you swim for 2.4 miles. You bike for 112 miles. You hop off your bike, and you run 26.2-mile marathon. Easy peasy, right? So I used to live in San Diego full-time, and a master swimmer, and in the pool, people I was training with were some of the top professional triathletes in the world. They all congregated in San Diego. And I used to talk to them about their tactics and so on. But there's one thing they all kept saying over and over and over again. Because you got this race that lasts 8 to 10 hours, the top athletes, and they spend about 10% of their effort on swimming, right? It's only 2.5 miles, and then they hop on the bike and so on. And to a person, they said, you never win a triathlon on the swim leg. The race is the bike and the run. You got to be good at swimming, you got to be competent, you got to finish it, but you never win on the swim leg. Well, that's true with prospecting. We never win a deal on the prospecting side of things. And yet we spend a disproportionate amount of our energy and effort and our thoughts thinking about lead gen. And it needs to change, because what we're doing is creating scenarios with our pipeline coverage ratios and so on, this vicious cycle, where we're not giving our sellers time to sell with expectations. As a consequence, we can't deliver the value to our buyers that they need to make decisions. And if we keep that up, they're just going to buy from the bots and the AI-driven experience, AI-programmed selling. So we have to, for me, victory would be, in 2 years, right now we've got all these conferences, inbound, outbound, traffic conversions, everything about lead gen and prospecting. So in 2 years, I think it'd be really great, and I'd know that we're on the right course, if in addition to you guys coming to T-Rex, you also registered to go to a conference called Discovery and Qualification. Because then we know we're thinking about the right things that are going to make us better sellers, enable us to win more business, and be a better service to our buyers. Last, let's talk about developing our people. Sales training, sort of universally acknowledged by CEOs and people who pay for it to be broken. They don't see a value from it. The way it's utilized by many companies, it's very episodic. Hey, we're going to develop our people because we're going to bring in Andy, and he's going to talk to us for 2 hours, and that will exhaust our training budget for the year. And hey, pull up our hands, we did it, we trained our people. That's a problem, it doesn't work. We've got people sort of a mindset in sales, sort of confident lot by nature, who think they sort of know what they're doing. So we get this confident incompetence thing going on. We have to change the model. We're not going to train our people, we educate our sellers. We have to devote time. If you're a sales leader, you should be setting aside 30 minutes every day during the workday to educate your sellers. It could be, we're going to sit down and listen to a podcast. We're going to watch a video and discuss it. We're going to read a book. I run book clubs for companies to help them do this. And the stipulation is if they want me to run the book club, they're going to agree to set aside 20 minutes every day for reading. Now, when I say that, most sales leaders say, oh, we don't have time for that. We're selling. But the statistics are pretty clear. This has been measured for decades, and it hasn't changed a whit, which is that sellers generally spend a third of their time actually engaged in selling. It was this way. Recent surveys, it was this way 30 years ago and 40 years ago. You spend a third of your time. You have time. Actually, I'll make that again. You don't have time not to do this. If you just want to keep on sort of muddling along, not upskilling your sellers, not encouraging them to invest in their own development, or sending them the message that you care about their development. You know, Gallup did a survey, said the number one reason sellers leave a job is perceived lack of opportunities coming from their manager. If you want to send a message to your team and reduce churn on your sellers, show them that you care. Invest time in their development. And as you're an individual seller, you need to take the same attitude as, look, it'd be great if your company invested a bunch of time in you. It'd be fantastic. Will they? Most don't. If you want a career in sales, you need to commit yourself to investing the time and effort, and yes, even your money, to getting better, because there'll be a return on that money for you. Spend at least 10 minutes a day. As for your seller, at least 10 minutes a day. Turn off the TV. Don't watch this latest episode of The Bachelor. Do something. You can DVR it anyway, right? So it's just spend that 10 minutes at a minimum engaging in a podcast, a video, an online course, some resource, so that you're focused on this idea of just getting just a little bit better every day, and the aggregate value of that is huge. And you set yourself apart from your competitors, which is really important, right? Because what the bottom lines on all this is, as more technology comes into the space, into sales, and into the buying process, the way you set yourself apart from everybody else, the way you differentiate yourself, is the value you personally can add to the buyer. So one of the big complaints from buyers about sellers is they don't understand business. And this is especially true people new into sales, they're fresh out of college. This isn't a generational thing, it's just anybody's new. You're not taught these things. How do you read a financial statement? How do you read a P&L? How do you read a balance sheet? I mean, I had sellers I was talking to the other day, fresh out of school, didn't understand the different departments of a company, how a company worked, how the departments work together. Again, they're not taught those things. That's fine. We need to teach it, or you need to learn it on your own. And once you have that knowledge, then you can start acquiring the business acumen in your customer's business. But it's hard to be smart about your customer's business if you don't understand business itself. So as managers, we need to take the responsibility to educate our people about this. This isn't training, this is ongoing education. Every single day. If you do that, it makes a huge difference. If you just look at the terms of books, Brian Tracy, a famous sales author, has a great quote, which I absolutely believe. He said, if you devote yourself to reading one book a month about your chosen field, within 12 months, you'll be in the top 1% of earners in your field. And I think there's a lot to that. I've seen that happen with people that I've worked with, that I've mentored, that I've coached. You just have to invest the time. So, in short, just sort of summing up, rethink our processes and the metrics we're using, because they're not serving us. Anything that's 100 years old isn't, we're overlaying modern technology on old metrics. It's not a good match. Think about how you're allocating your resources so you focus on winning deals, not on the process that's holding you back, and then invest in your own development. It's so important. I was a liberal arts major coming out of school. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know anything about sales, but I did have a burning curiosity to learn, and I had a competitive streak a mile wide. So I hated to lose, still do. So that motivated me to learn and read everything I could about sales, about decision-making, about psychology, about the fields I was in. I worked in satellite communications for 15 years, selling these large multi-million dollars. The largest deal I ever took individually is just under $100 million. What do I know about satellite communications? What I could taught myself, I was pretty smart for a layperson, but you had to educate, I had to invest. If I hadn't made that investment, it wouldn't have happened. So there is a future for B2B sales. Nope. Going the wrong way. Well, I guess that was the last one. There is a future for B2B sales, but it requires that we rethink and we reinvest in ourselves. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take questions. I'm also going to be around all day, so if you want to grab me in between sessions or whatever, I'd be happy to talk to you. Any questions?